If someone were to ask you, what is the most important thing you need to know how to do to survive and thrive in life, what would you say that thing is? Years ago, the father of evolution, Charles Darwin, told us all that secret. He said, the most important thing that you need to know to succeed in life is how to adapt. And that is our subject. Some individuals and institutions make the change when things get hard, but most fail. And so what we're going to do today is to try to dive into what is the secret of adaptation. Now, I'm going to cheat, and my cheat is very simple. I'm going to ask some questions because what we're going to discuss today is complicated. It includes economics, the science of chemistry and nuclear fission, sociology. All of these things are a little bit heavy, dry, and boring. So to try to make sure I keep you alert, because we've all just had a delicious lunch, I'm going to ask questions as we go along, and if you give the correct answer, you're going to get a little token of appreciation. Is that okay? Is that a good deal? I can't hear yes? Okay, all right. My son up here is going to give the correct answer a beautiful silver coin. Okay, the gentleman that we see here is Sir John Maynard Keynes. He is the father of modern macroeconomic theory. And he enjoys the distinction of single-handedly helping to rescue the United States from the Great Depression. We've all heard of that, but I don't see anyone here who actually lived through it. If you did, don't raise your hand. It's okay. He did this by coming in and changing the thinking of President Roosevelt. His simple idea was, look, we're in a situation now where businesses are not hiring. Again, this was the Great Depression. Unemployment rate was 20%. Government was the only thing that could do any spending to rescue the world. And so Roosevelt spent. Now, what we're going to do, that's what happened with Sir John Maynard Keynes, is to really look at two things that I consider the keys to adaptation. Number one, the ability to shift perspective when things change. If you're going in this direction or doing things this way and the facts tell you you should pivot, that's going to be important, being able to switch your beliefs. The second thing is the desire to be pleasing. I make the argument that one of the most important things in life is the desire to please what you consider to be good or God. To test my thesis, what I'd like to do is to tackle the most important current existential crisis facing us. And this is the first coin question. What would you say is the most important existential crisis facing us today? Raise your hand. Climate change. Irfan, you have your first winner. Let's give her a round of applause. Yes! All right. Now, climate change is the deal, and what's interesting is if you look at the graph, you will see that temperature is rising. You will also see that the prevalence, the intensity, and scale of climate cataclysms, like we just suffered in Florida with Milton, have increased. Science says that there is a direct causal relationship between humans and their use of fossil fuels and the increase in the world's temperature and all the cataclysms that we are going through. So my next question is, and I shouldn't have shown you this, oh my goodness, I'll have to save it. The next question is, what proportion of climate scientists say that there is this direct relationship? We all know it because we see it on the screen. What's the number? 97. It's 97%. But if you were to ask the average American, hey, what's the proportion of people, scientists, that say that climate change is a problem, they come in with a much lower number. Why is that? The reason that we have this lower number is that we have three things that keep us from changing: prejudice, ignorance, and inability. It is hard to get a group of people, a population, to change. And to illustrate my point that this is possible, I'm going to look at a couple of instances from history. As we go forward, though, I want to define the actual essence of the problem that we're facing with climate change. You see, the essence, at its root, if you were to put it in a sentence, is me and mine, before and over you and yours. And it contributes to something that scientists call the tragedy of the commons. It has three components. The first component is we all rush to take the common resource, in this case, our climate, our environment. The second component is that none of us suffers the consequences of abusing the environment. And what's the last one? The last one is that we don't believe anybody else cares. We don't care, they don't care, so it can't be fixed. But I'm a hopeful guy. So I'm going to go ahead and argue that we can fix it, and the way to do that is to look at our history. Now, when we first look at our history, in fact, even if we go back to the first story of men on earth, we read about Adam and his two children. What were their names? Cain and Abel. And what happened with Cain and Abel? Cain killed Abel. So Russell is standing here saying, hey, there's hope. We can move past being selfish. But Russell, you don't know. Look, this is something that's deep. It's been going on since the beginning of time. I still think there's hope. And what I want to do is to rally a couple of evidences from history, and this is my favorite one. Who would you say was the world's smartest person in the 20th century? Louder, please, because this is pretty straightforward. His face is on the... Albert Einstein, right? Okay. He was considered the smartest. What was the most, and this is a coin question, what was the most important invention of the 20th century? Quantum physics, wrong. At least according to Russell Ballew. The most important, give Dwayne a coin, please. The most important discovery of that century was nuclear fission. Why? Because the country that had that ability literally catapulted itself to superpower status. This is really important, friends, because Albert Einstein did not actually believe fission was possible. He had to be helped. And the person that helped him was a Hungarian Jew by the name of Leo Salazar. Basically, Leo Salazar had an epiphany called the chain reaction. He took this idea to Einstein. Einstein took it to the president, and they say, as they always say, the rest is history. The Manhattan Project was born out of Einstein's ability to adopt, switch direction, right, and adapt to the prospect of there being nuclear fission. This is another interesting example. It's not so prevalent now, but years ago, particularly in the 1940s, when we had World War II, it was very common to believe that women were intellectually inferior to men. In England, we had the war. And Hitler, being the diabolical genius that he was, he said, listen, I'm going to get England to bend. They're going to capitulate. And the way I will do this is I'm going to destroy all of the ships that are being sent from the United States to send food and other necessary provisions to England because they were not self-sufficient. And this happened. Winston Churchill was desperate. So he turned to one man and 66 women and said, you have a job. Your job is to figure out how to stop these U-boats from starving us to death. Do you think the women figured it out? That's not a coin question. You bet they did. They were able to not only figure it out, but they effectively addressed the three boogeymen. They ended prejudice because they were so competent. They advanced knowledge, right? They ended ignorance by devising, using science, a whole new protocol. And they taught that protocol to the primarily male officers of Her Majesty's Royal British Navy. It's an amazing story because what it did is it changed for all time how people look at women. Here's another question. When was the last time you made the decision to swap your perspective? Did you change because you lost a job or because there was a cataclysm? Think about that. You see, for many people, and Spencer Johnson, have anyone ever heard of Spencer Johnson? No? Oh, he wrote 2 books. I know you know the book, Who Moved My Cheese? Anyone know that book? Okay, everyone here. That book is about the importance of being able to adapt. And his second book, Out of the Maze, talks about the importance of being able to change our beliefs as a way to adapt. Now, again, if we say that changing our beliefs is the secret to being able to adapt, a natural question might be that, well, Russell, what do you think we should change our beliefs to? Well, one of the first things is this idea that war is inevitable. Human selfishness is inevitable. I want you to go ahead and try to imagine that war is not inevitable. Now, the counter evidence to what I've just said is pretty deep and overwhelming. There was a gentleman many years ago, in fact, 1,600 years ago, who observed the war between two states in Greece. His name was Thucydides. He was the first historian. And he said, whenever you have a declining power and a rising power, they're going to fight. Russell is saying that that need not be our destiny. In fact, as I've sat in the audience and listened to all the really cool things going on, we as a generation could say, well, Russell, you know, we aren't the Greeks. This isn't Athens versus Sparta. Hitler's dead. We're already doing really good things. The question is, how precisely do you define good? Is it simply whatever the majority agrees to? This is an important point. In 1884, there was a situation where 4 men were caught on a ship, and one of them happened to be a 17-year-old cabin boy. The cabin boy made the fatal error of taking in some seawater. So 2 of the other people on the ship said, hey, listen, looks like the cabin boy is going to die. Why don't we go ahead and eat him and make sure that we don't? Now, question for you. Again, 1880s. On the sea and in this situation, was this a common or an uncommon practice? Believe it or not, and I know it's kind of hard to accept on full bellies after a delicious lunch, it was a common practice. This case, Her Royal Majesty against Dudley versus Stevens, ended for all time the public's acceptance of killing someone in a desperate situation. Utilitarianism, doing the best good for the most people, or necessity were thrown out as reasons for why you eat the cabin boy when things get tough. Now, most people will say, Russell, I would never eat another human being. Why? Why won't most of you eat another human being? Believe it or not, whether you can state this or not, for most of the people on the planet Earth, it runs counter to their faith. I mean, it's just completely antithetical to their particular religious teachings, whatever your teachings. Friends, I got to tell you, whatever the Holy Book, there's no place in there where it says you can kill another human being out of necessity. And so we should pause and kind of step back and say, okay, why and how did this come to be? Case study for looking at that is the rise of Christianity in Rome. Years ago, in the period between 165 and 542 AD, there were a series of plagues that ravaged the folks in Rome. Who do you think, and this is a coin question, who do you think the folks were blamed for the plagues? The Christians. That's exactly right. I think you said it. So they were blamed, so they were persecuted. And why do you think they were blamed? Well, the people of that time all believed in their pagan gods, Jupiter and the rest of them. They said, well, these Christians have a different god, and Jupiter's mad. This is why we have these plagues. Earlier, we had the privilege of listening to some of the other speakers, and they came in and they talked about the teachings. The teachings of most of the religions urge us to love other people. In fact, they tell us that you're really supposed to kick in your love and kindness when they are your enemies. This is what the Christians did at that time. They were able to have the entire population adopt a whole new way of approaching what they considered to be God. That is, they adapted to the teachings of Christianity by adopting them because they saw how the Christians behaved. Now, when we think about the United States, I'd have to ask you, the United States, what would you say was our greatest challenge as a country? Absolutely. You know, people don't really appreciate how thoroughly and deeply entrenched slavery as an institution was in the United States. I do really manage millions of dollars. And whether people accept this or understand this, like in this setting, everyone's talking about private equity or stocks. But most people want their investments in bonds because they're safe. And years ago, there was such a thing as a slavery bond. That is, the bond was written on the life of a human being. So you could have an investor in Antwerp, right, sitting down having tea based upon an interest payment of human chattel. That's how deeply entrenched it was. So to imagine that that would ever come to an end was very hard. What's absolutely amazing, though, is that in this country, a group of people said on the basis of principle, slavery was not acceptable, and so we fought. Both sides invoked God, but one ultimately won. And I'd like to read the words of Lincoln because they're so touching. Lincoln illustrates something. He says, listen, slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war as a woe due to those by whom the offense came. A lot of time, this is hard English, it's from a long time ago, so I'll break it down. Basically, he says, listen, there was a time when God allowed slavery. Then there was a time when he said it must stop. And in order to remove it, God allowed a terrible war to ravage our ranks. Now, I think I'm over time, so this will be my last slide. Friends, I work with really, really wealthy people. They're called family offices. These are people who worked hard, they did the right things, and they were able to come up with a lot of money. And one of the things that you need to understand about these people is that many of them have hearts, hearts that are guided and influenced by their particular faith traditions. One of them is the gentleman that we see here. Easy question. I think all of you know who it is. Who is the gentleman? Rockefeller. He made his money. He made so much money that at one time, his personal holdings constituted 3%. 3% of the United States GDP. He was also a Christian. In the picture next to him, can anyone, and do we have one more coin left? Okay. Can anyone name either one of the two women in the picture? Phoebe Hearst, no. Nice try, though. Okay, well, do your research, and if you discover it on, like, looking at Google or whatever, go to my son and tell the name, and he'll give you the coin. Bottom line is that the two women decided to make the first African-American institution for the education of women in Atlanta. Here's what's interesting. When we look at the whole shift that is getting rid of slavery, how did most Americans react to that? Did they dig it or despise it? They weren't that thrilled, okay? Rockefeller, for his part, was an American after the period of slavery. His wife's mother was an abolitionist. And she approached him and said, listen, we need to fund this school. He generously gave of his money to fund the school. My final argument and slide is this. Love is a thing. And each of us in our own way have our hearts moved, be it your approach to God, your approach to good. That love prompts us to be our best versions. In the words of Abraham Lincoln, it brings out our better angels. Where there is love, according to Abdu'l-Baha, nothing is too much trouble, and there is always time. One of the things that we have to remember is that America, yes, it has its hard times, but it has always been the case that in this country and others, people moved by their ideal standards of what is good have done good. We will learn to address the selfishness that keeps us from being one and coming together, and we will ultimately overcome, just like we did with slavery, which people didn't think we could ever do, we're going to ultimately overcome the challenge of the climate. Let's just not drop the role that religions have historically played in this process.
Think of sharing what you know.